Hello and welcome. It's time for another in-depth edit. So today I'm gonna take this raw file of the Nice Point Lighthouse and I'm gonna turn it into a photo like this, while really showing you every single step I do from the very start to the finished and fully edited picture. Quickly before I get started, be sure to subscribe if you haven't done so already for more videos just as this one and other photography related videos in the future. First thing I like to do is just raise the shadows and bring down the highlights by both 100, and that way you just get a lot of detail in both areas to work with. Now, depending on your style, you might not want to go quite as far, but I really think that the 100 will work the best here. Then the next thing I like to do is just adjust the contrast, and especially if you're gonna work with a raw file, you're gonna start off with a relatively neutral looking photo. Additionally to that, by raising the shadows, that makes it even less contrasty. So just go a little bit into the right, and you know, it's very dependent on your photo and your liking, but I think around 40 works pretty well here. And then let's go to the whites, just hold down the Alt key and bring them to the right and stop before anything clips, just like this. And that way you get a lot of dynamic from before to after, a very big difference. And the blacks, now blacks are depending on the photo once again, but in this particular case I think I'm gonna go down by maybe just around -20. And if we see from before to after, we already got a lot more detail and a lot more dynamic in the overall photo. And then clarity, I think I'm just gonna add a bit, or maybe even more than just a bit here, because that really brings out all of this texture in these rocks and everything, which I think works pretty well. Yeah, let's just leave that at around 40. Vibrance and saturation, depending on the picture and your liking, you can raise something here, especially if you have a raw file. It oftentimes works pretty well. Just don't go too far with it, and generally I like vibrance better than the saturation because it adds color way more subtle and more naturally looking. So just around 15 here works pretty well. Then let's go on to the temperature slider, and a lot of people will probably just go for a neutral look, but that's really not what I would suggest you to do, because at the end you don't have to have accurate color to the actual scene, you just want to make it look as best as possible. So just look for yourself what you like better. I know that these aren't really conclusive tips, but at the end you really have to decide for yourself, because of course every single picture is very different. So I think I'm just gonna stick around 6000 right here, works pretty well. And let's go down to the tonal curve. Here a thing that I love to do is just bring up the highlights, and that way you get a lot of dynamic in your photo, maybe not quite as much, and especially in the sky you will be able to see it quite well. Now the important thing in the tonal curve in general is that you don't really look at the exposure, but more at the actual dynamic that it adds to your picture, because exposure is very easily fixable. So I'm just gonna add around 40 highlights here. By the way, the highlights down here are very different than the highlights in the basics adjustments. These down here really just affect the very bright parts, whereas the highlights up here really just affect the overall bright-ish areas. Then let's go on to the next sliders, and here you just want to make sure that you stick around -30 to maybe +30, not really too much, because that way you will really overdo it, but here maybe around -12 works pretty well. And just adjust the rest of these sliders, and maybe even bring up the shadows. The shadows are kind of like the highlights, they really just affect the very dark parts of your photo. Then once you're done with that, you can try to play around with the point curve, and the point curve, generally for landscape pictures it doesn't really work all that well, but for cityscapes it really does work quite well, so just play around with it, and at the end see for yourself if you like it or not. So we're already done with the two most important global adjustments, and if we see here from before to after, already a huge difference. And usually I like to to go just with the global adjustments first and then go into the local adjustments, but this time I'm gonna do it a little bit differently. So let's just straight away fix the sky, because by bringing up the highlights down here, bringing up the whites, we really made the sky very dynamic, which is a good thing, but also very bright. So let's just grab a graduated filter here, drag it over the sky and try to fix the exposure by just going into the minus exposure slider. Now you don't want to go too far with it, and you want to make sure that you have a relatively kind of soft edge, so you don't have it super harsh like this. And additionally, to just the exposure, you can also go into the contrast, especially if you have a very contrasty or a very structured clouds in your picture. It can work really well. Same with the clarity. And oftentimes, if you will bring down the exposure in the sky, you might get a little bit of a color shift. So just try to go a bit into the minus saturation, or of course you can try to add maybe some blues as well. So let's just see before that one graduated filter and here's after. I mean, huge difference, not much to say here. Maybe I just went a little bit too far. So by bringing down the exposure in the sky, we brought up these two lens spots, which really are distracting. And you really want to make sure that you get rid of your lens spots, because they are very distracting. Just go into the spot removal tool, then go to heal and drag it over the lens spot. And usually Lightroom will do a good job. Maybe you have to right click select new source once in a while. But yeah, I think that looks pretty good. So let's zoom out again, and I'm gonna do some more local adjustments, but before I do that, let's just see what else I want to do in the global adjustments. So here, split toning. Split toning is a thing that you definitely want to play around with, especially if you have a sunset, sunrise picture, or anything with a lot of color in it. Now, this isn't really a very colorful picture, but I'm still gonna play around with it. So just go through all of these colors, see if there's maybe a hue that you like a little bit better. For example, here I think just going a little bit into the orange works pretty well to cancel out some of that very bluish color. Let's just bring that up by a little bit. You of course once again don't want to make this too much, but just around 15 works pretty well here. And you can also do the same thing with shadows and see if there's anything you like better there as well. So let's just quickly see. I don't think I'm gonna add any more orange tones. Maybe I'm even gonna go a little bit into the blues just to give a nice differentiation from the shadows to the highlight parts. And that is also why I love the split toning. You can just add a lot more differentiation in terms of the colors, because it adds more colors in the highlights than in the shadows. And with the shadow tool, it's the other way around. And you would just not get this kind of natural and differentiating look by just going a ton into the warm tones here at the temperature slider. So let's go down and quickly see before the split toning adjustment. And here is after. Not the biggest difference in this particular photo, but still a little bit better. And once again, if you have a very colorful picture, that will make a much bigger impact. Then down here to the detail, you just want to make sure that you zoom in 1:1, and first thing, always bring up the color slider. What this will do is get rid of the purple and green sensor noise, which makes your picture look so much cleaner. It really doesn't have any bad effect on the overall color either. So really amazing slider, and definitely take advantage of that. Noise reduction on the other hand, I really don't like the slider too much, because even if I go just around 25 into the plus noise reduction, you see we lose so much detail and so much sharpness. And you know, it does get rid of the noise, but unless you have a ton of noise in your photo, I think it's a better trade-off to not go into the plus noise reduction and in return preserve all of that detail and sharpness. Then the third and last slider would be sharpening, and I would suggest you to add at least a little bit of sharpening in any case. That really can help to give the most sharpness out of your picture. Depending on your lens, I would go between 50 and maybe 70. Don't really go too much further than that, otherwise you will really start to get a lot of noise from the sharpening and a lot of artificial texture that doesn't really look good. So I think I'm gonna go maybe around 60 in this case. Then once you've done that, just want to make sure that you zoom out again, hold down the Alt key while bringing the masking slider to the right, and what this will give you is a sharpening mask. And you just want to make sure that you don't select too much of the water, the sky, or pretty much any non-textured surfaces. Now you don't have to get it perfect, because then you will not sharpen enough of the actual elements in your picture that you want to have sharpened, but just make it look something like this, you know. If there's a little bit of white in the sky, it doesn't really matter, but what matters is that it isn't completely white. So something like this works pretty well here. Then I'm not quite sure how much else I want to do here in the global adjustments. I think I'm gonna go down to lens corrections, just go to color and remove chromatic aberration. That way you will get rid of the purple and green fringing on the high contrast edges. As you see here, just a really great thing to just check and it will get rid of it. And also make sure that you enable the profile corrections. Choose your lens, in this case the Canon 18-55 kit lens, and it will get rid of the distortion as well as the vignetting, which really is a great thing. Speaking of vignetting, you can add some additional vignetting to give kind of your picture more attention towards the censure or just set the mood, which I think works quite a lot of the time down here in the effects tools. So in this particular photo I am going to add quite a bit of vignetting actually, maybe around 25. You can also bring the midpoint more towards the center. Yeah, I think that actually works pretty well, and once again really helps to give more attention towards the center from before the effects adjustments. And here is after. Definitely completely optional, but I would suggest you at least play around with it. Then the last thing that I think I'm gonna adjust in terms of the global adjustments here would be the profile in the camera calibration, and this will change the hue, the colors, the lighting scheme of your entire photo, which can really be very effective and can really change the way your picture looks. For example, the camera landscape I really like here. Let's just go through the other profiles anyways. And I mean, you could do this at the very start of your editing, but then you don't really have an idea of what color is gonna look like, so I would suggest you to do this last. At least that's how I do it. But once again, just go through all of these different settings and at the end stick with whatever you like best. And I think here it's either a choice between camera landscape or camera portrait. I think camera portrait looks a little bit more natural maybe. Yeah, so let's just keep it at camera portrait. And from before that adjustment to after, you see it just works a lot better for the overall photo. So I think I'm pretty much done with the global adjustments. Maybe I'm just gonna go back to the split toning and reduce the highlight saturation just a tiny bit. So yeah, I think I'm done with the global adjustments. Let's just quickly once again see from the raw file to where we are at right now, and once again a very big difference. Then let's go to the local adjustments, and as you've known before, I've added this graduated filter to fix the exposure in the sky. But I want to do some more with the graduated filters, so I'm gonna grab another one. And a thing that I really like to do is grab one over the side of the photo where the light is coming from, which is usually the sky in your landscapes, and just make it a little bit brighter. Usually not too much, but just around maybe a third of a stop, and grab another one in parallel over the other side. You just want to make sure that you have very soft edges if you do that, and go into the minus exposure with the other side, and once again just around a third of a stop, but that way you really get a lot of differentiation from bright to dark, and it really makes your picture look a lot more complex. And as long as you don't overdo it, you won't even notice, or your viewer won't even notice that you've done anything. It's really a cool little trick to complexify your whole lighting. Another thing that I really like to do is grab a graduated filter for the bottom. For that you can just hold down the shift key and you will get it perfectly straight. Really just a very small filter, and go into the minus exposure, and that way you get to close out your picture, and that is really a technique that helps to keep your eye within the picture. And you can try to do the same thing with the sky, even though I would suggest you not to go quite as far. And let's go to the adjustment brush, and the adjustment brush I use in pretty much all of the cases where I want to adjust a very broad area within the picture with some curves that I can't do with the graduated filters. So whether that be some more additional vignetting over just some corners that I would want to have more control over than I would get with the graduated filters, or maybe grab another one to change the color in some areas. Maybe the foreground here could use a little bit more kind of a greenish tone, and let's really try to get out some of these green tones, because I think the foreground was just a little bit too warm. And yeah, I think that looks actually pretty well. So in terms of everything except for the dodge and burning, I think I'm pretty much done. So let's grab some rail filters, reset everything, make sure that you invert the mask and touch your feathers to 100, and then just add some dodge and burning. Dodge and burning is making individual parts darker or brighter, and that way you can really complexify your whole lighting scheme and add so much different exposure and a lot of different interest. So you just want to go with the lighting scheme, make some of the bright parts even brighter, make some of the dark parts even darker. Usually I like to start off with the plus exposure, but here I'm actually going to start off with the negative exposure. If you would like to learn more about dodge and burning, just check out the link in the description. There I talk about 30 minutes in depth about dodge and burning. But let's go here into the negative exposure with this ledge, because that is already in the shadows and I really just want to emphasize that even more, get more contrast. Let's just make this entire bottom part a bit darker. Right click duplicate, maybe a smaller filter over here. And once again, you don't want to go over the brightest spots and go down into the exposure, otherwise you will ruin your picture pretty much and it will not look natural in any way. Just go in the already dark parts, make them darker, and once again right click duplicate. That's why I love the rail filters for dodge and burning. Because you can just right click duplicate, drag it to another area, but also because you have the full control over each filter, you can just adjust the value of one without actually affecting any other filters. So let me just finish that up here. I'm not gonna add too many negative exposure filters in this photo, but maybe just another one over the left, not go quite as far into the negative exposure, and maybe kind of a bigger one on this cliff right there. So in terms of the negative exposure, I think that's pretty much all I'm gonna do. Let's just quickly see from before to after. Already a lot more contrasty, but now I'm gonna add some plus exposure filters. By the way, you could use some plus contrast, plus clarity, or maybe even add some color as well if that's what you want. But I think I'm pretty much gonna keep that relatively clear and just go with the plus exposure, and then just drag some filters over the already bright areas. You can really just drag a few small filters over just some very small spots, and that way you really complexify everything and add so much different interest. And it can really bring your pictures to the next level. Not really too much I can talk about it though, because it's relatively self-explanatory and relatively intuitive once you get the hang of it. So let's add another one over this cliff right here. Right click duplicate, maybe even drag one in the sky to make this part in the sky a little bit brighter. Not go quite as far with it though, really just a hint. And then let's grab another plus exposure filter, right click duplicate, and maybe, just some little areas to add some reflection, some interest. and some additional exposure. I know I keep repeating myself, but once again, there's really not too much I can talk about here. So let me finish that up here by dragging another one over there, maybe a last one over here, and I think that is pretty much it. So let's see before any dodge and burning, and here is after. Now depending on your picture that might have a bigger or a lesser effect, but it in any case definitely complexifies everything. So once again, from before to after, just a lot more interesting and a lot more contrast. And with that said, I think I'm pretty much done with the overall picture. I'm really happy with the way that it looks. And let's go here into the history and see where we started at with the raw file. This is the raw file without any editing, and you see a lot flatter, a lot less color, and a lot less dynamic. And this is what we've made out of it. Just a lot more interesting, and overall I think a much stronger picture. So as always, I want to thank you very much for watching. Make sure you subscribe if you haven't done so already for more Lightroom tutorials, landscape photography edits just as this one. And also be sure to share it with your friends if you found it helpful. Take care, and I'll see you in the next episode.